It was just after 7 in the evening when the sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, casting a golden hue over our quiet neighborhood. I was sitting on the front porch of my property, an old colonial-style home nestled on a couple acres, just outside the HOA limits, with a glass of iced tea in hand and my dog, Copper, lying beside me. Life was finally peaceful after years of city hustle. That is, until Karen showed up. She was everything you'd expect from a walking HOA stereotype: platinum blonde bob, sunglasses even at dusk, clipboard in hand, and an entitled stride that could pierce concrete. Karen had recently been elected president of the local HOA, and from what I'd seen, she wielded that role like a queen's scepter. Except my house wasn't in her kingdom, and that drove her nuts. I first met Karen 3 months ago when she stopped by unannounced to introduce herself and suggest I replace my vintage truck parked near the curb. I'd smiled, told her kindly to mind her business, and that was the beginning of a silent war. Now she was back, marching up my driveway like she owned the place. "You're not allowed to park that trailer here," she snapped, pointing toward my enclosed utility. "Trailer beside the garage. It's on my property," I replied, calm but firm. "The HOA has standards," she insisted. "And I'm not part of the HOA," I reminded her. "But you're within visible range of our neighborhood. You're lowering property values." I almost laughed. "Karen, unless you bought this land from me when I wasn't looking, you have zero say over what I do on it." That didn't sit well. Her nostrils flared, and she turned sharply on her heel, pulled out her phone, and said words that made my eyes narrow. "I'm calling the police. You're being aggressive." I blinked. "Aggressive? I'm literally sitting on my porch." She waved me off and dialed 911 right there. The moment I saw her press the call button, a grin crept across my face. She had no idea. See, my wife, Rachel, is a dispatcher, and not just any dispatcher. She's been with the county sheriff's department for 11 years and knows every patrol officer on duty. She also happens to be sitting inside our house, at the time, just finishing up a late shift remotely from her home terminal. I let Karen go ahead with her call. She dramatically described me as a hostile man, possibly armed, refusing to follow HOA orders. My wife heard the call come in. From inside, I could hear her pick up the line. "Animo 11, what's your emergency?" And Karen went off. As Rachel realized what was happening, I heard the bemused tone in her voice as she clarified, "Can you confirm the address?" Karen did. Rachel paused a beat. "I believe you're referring to my husband." There was silence. Rachel continued, her voice now laced with that calm, authoritative tone that made perps fold instantly. "Ma'am, this is not an HOA matter. This is private property outside your jurisdiction. There is no aggression, no crime, and no valid reason for police involvement." Karen stammered. "But he's threatening property values," Rachel calmly informed her that filing a false report was itself a crime. That's when Karen hung up, but it didn't end there. Oh no. Rachel called in a report of her own. Not for Karen's arrest, yet, but to document the misuse of emergency services and potential harassment. The next day, 2 deputies came out to speak with Karen. I watched from across the road as they gently but firmly explained the boundaries of her HOA authority. Karen stormed back into her house red-faced, but the incident kicked off something bigger. I decided enough was enough. I began documenting every interaction, every time Karen stepped onto my land, every bogus citation she tried to tape to my mailbox. I even installed cameras with microphones. Rachel supported it all. We both knew how this could escalate, if not handled smartly. Then came the anonymous letters, typed, threatening, demanding I comply with community standards, so I filed a civil harassment complaint. Karen tried to fight back, bringing her own stack of supposed infractions to the court. The judge didn't even let her finish. "Ma'am," he said, "this property is not within your HOA. You have no authority here. Continuing this behavior may constitute criminal harassment. That shut her up for a while. But then came the day of retaliation. I returned from town to find my trailer door forced open and tools scattered. Nothing stolen, just tossed about. The cameras caught her. She'd waited until mid-morning, crept onto my property, and vandalized my trailer. I handed the footage to the sheriff. Karen was arrested, trespassing, vandalism, harassment, and that was just the beginning. What started as a simple HOA dispute turned into a case that made local headlines. Turns out, Karen had been pulling similar stunts with other neighbors who weren't technically under the HOA umbrella but lived near enough to catch her ire. With my help and Rachel's knowledge of the system, we formed a small coalition. People began coming forward. Within 3 months, Karen had 8 formal complaints filed against her. The HOA board tried to cover for her, claimed she was overzealous. But once we presented the compiled evidence, including the 911 call to Rachel, the board had no choice. Karen was removed from her position. She tried to sue me for defamation. It didn't even make it past the first hearing. The judge cited the video evidence, audio recordings, official reports, and the 911 call handled by my wife as more than sufficient to dismiss the suit with prejudice. Karen's reputation? Toast. My property? Safer than ever. And Rachel? She got promoted for her handling of the situation with poise and professionalism. Now I've got a new sign at the entrance of my driveway. Private property, not HOA. Dispatcher's husband lives here. And wouldn't you know it? Karen hasn't been back since. The next few moments after Karen stomped off my porch were a mixture of adrenaline and disbelief. I watched her retreat with the kind of righteous fury only a self-appointed HOA queen could muster. Her high heels clicked against my gravel driveway like war drums. Copper, my golden retriever, tilted his head and gave a soft whine, almost as if he could sense what was coming. I wasn't nervous, not even a little. See, Karen thought she was pulling a power move by calling the cops. But I had a royal flush, tucked neatly in my pocket, my wife, Maria. Maria had been the county's head emergency dispatcher for over 12 years. She knew every officer, every fire marshal, and every code. When Karen called 911 and breathlessly demanded immediate police intervention for a non-compliant generator and a threatening man on her HOA property, she had no idea she was dialing into my household. At the dispatch center, Maria happened to be on duty. She told me later the moment she heard the address, she had to mute her mic to stifle a laugh. Karen's voice, shrill and scattered, was bouncing all over the place, trying to make it sound like I was the aggressor. That I had verbally threatened her and refused to follow HOA regulations and illegally ran a generator. Maria asked her calmly, "Ma'am, just to clarify, did this individual threaten you physically?" Karen huffed. "Well, not exactly. He implied I should get off his land." Maria asked again. "And are you certain this address is under the HOA jurisdiction?" Karen barked back. "Of course it is. I'm the president." Maria almost choked. She knew that our property was zoned specifically outside HOA boundaries, legally, publicly, permanently, and she had access to the county map to prove it. Still, Maria stayed professional and dispatched 2 officers, both of whom had already visited our property for BBQs and neighborhood watch meetings. I sat on the porch swing, arms crossed, just waiting for the circus to arrive. About 10 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up, lights off, not in a rush. Deputy Miller and his partner stepped out, giving me a subtle nod before turning their attention to Karen, who was now pacing like a prosecutor rehearsing closing arguments. "She's been on the phone for the last 10 minutes, I muttered, loud enough for them to hear. Karen pointed at me the moment the officers approached. "That's him. That's the man who threatened me. He's running a generator without a permit, and he's endangering the entire neighborhood with noise and fumes." Deputy Miller looked at me, looked at the generator, which, by the way, was whisper quiet and EPA approved. Then back at her. "Ma'am, do you live here?" Karen blinked. "No, but I manage the HOA. I enforce the rules." "And you said he threatened you?" "Yes. He told me to leave." "On his property?" "Yes." There was a long pause. Deputy Miller pulled out his notepad, slowly, almost for dramatic effect. "Ma'am," he said, "what you've described isn't a criminal offense. In fact, if you're on his land without permission, you may be the one violating the law." Karen's mouth fell open. "He's not in the HOA," the deputy added. "This parcel was exempted from your development zone when the county approved the plan. It's his land, his rules." Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "But he's disturbing the peace." "Running a generator during a county-wide power outage isn't disturbing the peace, ma'am," the other deputy said, arms crossed. "In fact, it's recommended for residents with medical needs, livestock, or business operations. Plus," Miller continued, "we've got record of his permits. Everything checks out." Karen was still sputtering when I stood up and gave the deputies a friendly wave. "Anything else y'all need from me?" They shook their heads. "Nope, just make sure you've got fuel for the week. Power's gonna be out till Tuesday." Karen's voice cracked. So he can just get away with this?" Miller turned toward her, giving her a dry smile. "Get away with what? Being a good neighbor who's more prepared than the rest of us?" Then he dropped the final hammer. "And ma'am, you might want to be careful about filing false reports. 911 is for emergencies, not power trips." Karen's face flushed a deep crimson. And then they left. That should have been the end of it. But people like Karen, they don't just take a loss quietly. The next day, I found flyers taped to every mailbox in the neighborhood, even mine. Unauthorized. Generator usage. Report all violations to HOA. At the bottom, it said, "Respect the rules or expect the consequences." I took the flyer, walked back into the house, and handed it to Maria. "Looks like she's doubling down." Maria chuckled and reached for her laptop. "Time to send an email to the county zoning board. Let's clear this up once and for all." What followed over the next 2 weeks was what I now refer to as the Karen spiral. Karen filed a complaint with the county health board, claiming my generator was leaking fuel. Inspectors showed up, ran a test, and left shaking their heads. They said it was one of the cleanest installs they'd ever seen. Then she tried calling animal control, saying my dog Copper was aggressive. The officer arrived, knelt down to pet Copper, and took a selfie with him for his Instagram. He left a dog treat behind and laughed the whole way to his truck. She even submitted an anonymous complaint to the fire department, alleging that I had flammable material too close to the house. They inspected and ended up praising my fire safety setup. Apparently, I had exceeded standards. By now, half the neighborhood was watching the drama unfold. A few even started dropping by to recharge their phones or store frozen groceries in my backup fridge. I didn't charge a dime. The lights stayed on at my place while the rest of the street sat dark, and that's when the tide turned. People started talking, whispering about how Karen's obsession with HOA power had gone too far. That maybe she wasn't looking out for their best interests, but feeding her own ego. At the next HOA meeting, one I wasn't invited to, obviously, 3 board members resigned on the spot. One of them later came by my house and apologized for the circus act. "She made us look like fools," he said. "You were just minding your business." By the 3rd week, Maria and I got a formal letter in the mail from the county itself. They had investigated all of Karen's complaints, found them baseless, and issued her a warning for abuse of public resources. That wasn't even the best part. Turns out, Maria's 911 dispatch call had been recorded and reviewed. Not only did it show Karen trying to manipulate emergency services, but it revealed that she knew she was on private property and still lied. Trespassing. County placed her under administrative review, and within a month, the HOA board voted unanimously to suspend her leadership privileges pending an ethics review. In short, She got fired from her own imaginary throne. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with Maria, copper lying between us, generator humming in the background. A few neighbors came by, offered a slice of pie, some even brought firewood to share. For the first time in a while, the neighborhood felt like a real community, not a dictatorship run by Karen. One of the neighbors, a retired Air Force vet named Hank, handed me a beer and said, "You didn't just win, son. You reset the whole board." And just as the sun dipped below the trees, I saw Karen's moving truck. She didn't say goodbye. Not that anyone was waiting for it.